Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. With this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 4070 Super in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This one is the Founders Edition model of the card. I am running it with the latest NVIDIA drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power Ups GPU Z. And over on the left, I'm pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X 3D CPU with half of its cores disabled, making it the same as a 7800X 3D and 32GB of RAM. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's go over the settings first. I am starting at 1440p resolution because this is the target resolution for the 4070 Super, but I'm also going to test this at 1080p and 4K resolutions as well. And right here I'm using the very ultra settings preset, which is basically the supreme preset, really. So max settings with the texture pool size set to very ultra instead, because this consumes a lot of VRAM. And even though you can actually run this on supreme with a 12GB GPU, the allocation would actually be maxed out, so I prefer to have a little bit of headroom there and play with very ultra texture pool size instead. Everything else is set to the maximum. Full ray tracing or path tracing is not enabled at the moment, but I will take a look at that as well in this video. And as you can see, we're using DLAA on the upscaling here, or the super resolution, which means that this is still running at native 1440p, but it's applying the anti-aliasing of DLSS on top of it. Let's go and play the game now. At the start here, we're getting 90-something frames per second, very close to 100 frames. So yeah, already we can tell this is going to be a pretty nice experience. However, the main issue that I have with this game, whenever we're not using path tracing, is the shadow pop-in. I am telling you this in every single video, but I think I need to emphasize it and showcase it, because look at that. It's super noticeable, guys. Now, the way to get rid of that horrible shadow pop-in is by enabling the path tracing, namely path tracing set to medium, which only enables ray traced sun shadows. So that will fix all of the shadow pop-in, which is very nice indeed. Yeah, it's the buttery smooth experience, as you can see by the frame time graph as well. With the latest update, they also fixed the little jitters that I was seeing in the frame time graph in my initial videos. So that's great. Even in 8GB GPUs, it's running a little bit more stable now. And you can see the shadow LOD once again over there. It's very small. As you walk, things just creep into the image and get way higher quality shadows, you know. It's a bit distracting once again, but if you want a super stable, very nice, high refresh rate experience, well, don't enable path tracing and you will have, it's still good visuals, right? And with a very smooth experience. Almost high refresh rate, I would say, and 90 FPS is already kind of high refresh rate. Now, if you want even higher FPS, I think this is a good baseline to enable frame generation on top of. So enabling FG, ooh, that VRAM went to 12 gigs right there, but it is working just fine. It does give us around 30 frames per second or so, maybe 40 at times, and it gets 100 plus frames per second. Feels a bit smoother, but in terms of input lag, you can notice that there is a little bit of added input lag on top of what we saw previously at native resolution, you know. Yeah, it's fine. It's still above 100 FPS, so the input lag is not too obnoxious, but it's definitely there. Now, if you don't want to utilize frame generation to make it better, you can always utilize quality DLSS, and with quality DLSS, things are even faster now than with frame generation. As you can see, getting 120s instead of the 110s, still dropping into the 110s. Frame time graph is a little bit weird there with those fluctuations. Not sure what those are all about, but okay. But as I showed in my previous videos, if you lock the FPS, you can get rid of those little spikes here and there. Absolutely, so no problems, okay? And you get 120 FPS. And on a 1440p display, quality DLSS will still look great. You can tell that DLSS is enabled though, but it's a minor visual difference, honestly. It's just slightly softer, I guess, compared to native resolution. So it's definitely a good option to play the game with, like this. And if you want to enable frame generation on top of quality DLSS at 1440p, well, you can expect super high frame rates. As you can see, 150s, no problems. Now the input lag is even less noticeable, of course, because the frame rate is higher. The VRAM allocation is not going to 12 gigs because we're running quality DLSS here at 1440p, which renders the game at 960p internally and then upscales to 1440, and it's just going to be a buttery smooth experience. Actually, inside of the city, with these settings, we should actually be hitting 180s, 190s, even 200 FPS at times. So no problems, guys. This is really nice and solid experience. Very, very smooth indeed. Now, that's it for 1440p without path tracing, guys. And now, let's set it back to native resolution here and do it with some path tracing. Here we go. Path tracing or full ray tracing was off until now. And now I'm going to enable it on medium first, which enables RT Sun shadows. And apparently it ran out of VRAM and it swapped some things into the RAM because it's at 13 gigabytes right there on the RAM. Oh boy. They also say that you require a minimum of 12 gigabytes to run path tracing in this game. So there's that. Oh my. Okay. Maybe we need to restart, okay? Do not give up just yet. And after a restart, it's the same thing. Okay. So we'll need to lower the texture pool size over here because that consumes a lot of VRAM, and with path tracing enabled at the same time, it's not possible. As you can see, I'm gonna set that to high, I guess. Come on, high, and let's restart the game. And indeed, it does work, guys. As you can see, we're now getting 50-something FPS. Still a very big drop compared to what we were seeing without the path tracing enabled. But this means that it will very likely, and it will definitely be playable with DLSS quality in just a little bit, and especially with frame generation. Not sure about the frame generation because that consumes a bit more VRAM as well, and it might run out of VRAM. But yeah, as you can see, no more annoying shadow popping happening at the moment. The shadows are consistent, they look great from faraway distances as well, and yeah, we fixed that problem basically with the path tracing in this game. So now we're back in this initial area where we started, and you can see that those bushes over there, they're not rendering the shadows as we walk. As you can see, the shadows are always there, and this is exactly how it should be. I just wish the LOD of the shadows was better at supreme settings without using any path tracing, because then we could have the best of both worlds. So these settings are pretty good for the 4070 Super. I'm going to enable the quality DLSS at the moment, and that should make it 60 plus most of the time. Okay, still dropping down, probably, yep, as you can see, as I move a little bit over here, it's dropping down into the 50s. Okay, yeah, it's still dropping into the 50s over here in this area as well. The good news is, this is one of the most, if not the most intensive area in the entire game, guys. So yeah, dropping into the high 50s is not the end of the world. In the city area, for example, it's going to get 60 plus 100% of the time. But the bad news is this is extremely intensive, and well, we got way higher FPS previously playing without any path tracing enabled, and this is still medium path tracing, guys, okay? If we fully utilize path tracing, the full ray tracing option there, it's going to be rough, even with the DLSS, I can tell. But you know what, guys? This is a decent baseline for frame generation, so I guess if we enable that and if it doesn't run out of VRAM while doing so, doesn't seem like it's running out. Okay, VRAM usage went up, or the allocation there, but still not having any stuttering issues or slowdowns. Now we can get 90 frames per second, which is feeling pretty nice and smooth, of course, high refresh rate. And the input lag is definitely there. It's more noticeable than previously because it's 90 FPS, but I think as long as it stays above 80, I think it feels okay in a single-player title. You can get used to it pretty quickly, you know? It's fine, and again, in the city area, you're more likely to see 100 plus FPS than drops into the 80s like we're seeing at the moment. So overall, it's a decent experience like this at the 1440p resolution. I can't complain too much. It's path tracing after all. It's extremely intensive tech. The only big complaint that I have here is that the game should look better without path tracing, and it shouldn't have as many pop-in issues, both in terms of shadow pop-in and texture or object pop-in as well. Anyway, around here, as you can see, much higher FPS, 120s. It's a very big difference, guys, okay? And these stutters that keep happening, whenever the little icon, the hat icon, shows up on top of the screen, on the top right, I will try to make it happen again. There we go. See that? We got a stutter, we got the icon. That means that it's just a checkpoint save or something like that, and it's not actually stuttering because of the VRAM or anything. Also, the RAM usage went up by quite a bit, as you can see, 14 gigabytes on the RAM, but we still don't have any slowdowns. So I guess even if it did run out of VRAM at this point, it's still providing a smooth experience and a very playable one. It's not having major issues with stability, actually. Like that frame time graph is one of the smoothest frame time graphs that I've seen in recent games, so there's that. Hello, Jack. How you going, buddy? There we go. It's so cute when he meows, guys. Look at that. Beautiful stuff. I love it. So, guys, I think that if you want to play with path tracing, these are the adequate settings for the 4070 Super here. You could increase the path tracing to high or full ray tracing as well if you want to, especially if you play with a controller. It would still feel okay as long as you keep the DLSS quality and FG, but I feel like for a mouse and keyboard experience, this is it. Anyway, let's stop it there, guys. And now I'll disable frame generation. I'll also disable DLSS, or I'll set it to DLEA actually. Got a black screen, the game just crashed, okay. It's good because I wanted to restart anyways, since the RAM usage went up by a lot. And now I'm back to the jungle area, guys, getting 50s. It's still native resolution, you know. And I want to check it with the high full ray tracing, okay? Woo boy, it kills it. So now we got RT reflections enabled as well as RT sun shadows. Yeah, oh my goodness, okay. I don't think it's running out of VRAM, but the VRAM definitely went up by a little bit. I think this is just the native FPS that it should get with path tracing, with these options of path tracing enabled. And yeah, it is pretty terrible. You should definitely stick to just the sun shadows. Still, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, and I will lower down the texture pool size to low. And if the FPS are the same, that means that we weren't really VRAM bound or anything, it's just how it runs. Okay, guys, so it's getting 36 FPS, that's quite a big difference. So it was a bit VRAM bound previously when we enabled the path tracing. As you can see, it's getting 30s. Always above 30 FPS, I guess. VRAM allocation is way, way lower than it was before at 10 gigs. But if you're wondering, an 8GB GPU, well, yeah, it wouldn't be able to run path tracing at all. I mean, it's playable. I think if we enable DLSS on quality, it's going to make it all right. Yeah, in the 50s. So DLSS quality with high path tracing gets us basically the same FPS as DLAA plus path tracing on medium. So now it's a question of, are you willing to make that compromise of getting 50-ish frames per second, 40 sometimes, as you can see here, just to have those RT reflections? I showed in the RTX 4090 video that you will notice the RT reflections more in the city area. RAM usage went up, guys. So maybe this area just consumes more RAM. Alright, it wasn't really running out of VRAM too much previously, although it was at 14 gigabytes, not at 13.5, but yeah. The main difference that you'll see is in puddles and maybe in some buildings, inside of some of the buildings, and this glow that you see being reflected off of the doors and the ground over here. It's basically the hue of the sky reflecting on those surfaces. This isn't here if you disable the ray traced reflections, and it adds a bit to the ambiance, I would say. What if we utilize frame generation over it? I think the frame generation helps it a lot here with these path traced settings for sure. We're now up into the 100s. I mean, yeah, that's a lot better. And with this input lag, it's definitely playable. You can get used to it in like a minute or two, and it's not going to be annoying, I think. At least it isn't to me. I'm usually a bit prone to noticing things like input lag and stuff like that. For example, my friends can play with frame generation with 70 FPS. I can't, okay? I look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, how can you handle this? And they're like, yeah, it's fine. But for me, I require at least like 80 plus in this particular title for it to be comfortable. And right now it's definitely getting way higher than 80 plus, as you can see. It's very nice. Very smooth as well. Frame time graph doesn't have a single spike to speak of. Obviously, over here in the jungle area, things are going to be a little bit different. FPS are going to be lower. So it gets 80s. Yeah, mid 80s at times. You can definitely start telling the input lag. Oh boy. Yeah, that's not amazing, really, guys. Again, you can get used to it, and with a controller, for example, it's very, very hard to notice. I'm not using the controller, I just had it right there, okay? But, yeah, with mouse and keyboard... Also, I completely forgot, but we're using the texture pool size now set to low, so some of the textures, especially at the distance, I guess, will not look as good. So keep that in mind, right? If that bothers you... don't play with RT reflections on, but if it doesn't bother you, it is still a very pretty game. You know, some of the textures, or at least most of the textures up close, they still look really nice. Anyway, this is a lot of settings to cover, guys, but let's disable frame generation. Let's go back to DLAA and I guess let's enable RT indirect lighting, or make it full RT on the path tracing setting over here. So this is basically maxed settings on the path tracing as well as, and the max settings on everything else aside from texture pool size. And this way we can get 20s. I'll still restart. I really think it doesn't need a restart because we didn't go over the VRAM limits here. But yeah, I'll still restart it anyways. Nah, it's exactly the same, guys. It did reset our RAM and VRAM usages though, but it's getting exactly the same FPS after a restart. So this is it, 1440p, full ray tracing enabled, max path trace settings, max settings everywhere else aside from the texture pool size. And yeah, this is what we get. So to make it better, obviously we need quality DLSS, and with quality DLSS we went from 29 FPS to 50 FPS. A 20 FPS improvement, that's a big increase, guys. Damn, 45 over here. Yeah, not too bad. Now it's playable again. I mean, if you want the maximum settings possible out of this game with this GPU, aside from the texture streaming budget again, or texture pool size, actually, that's it. Which, again, you could probably set it to medium and it would be fine. I'm just setting it to low because I want to be safe here. And I don't want to see any slowdowns while I'm benchmarking this, okay? But yeah, it's getting stable 40 plus frames per second all of the time with all of the visuals cranked up. It's nice looking. It's impressive because it's path tracing, you know. Path tracing is the biggest thing there is in terms of graphics. It's extremely, extremely expensive on hardware and intensive. And yeah, it's running right now with DLSS qualities help. Although these FPS aren't a good baseline to enable frame generation. If it's close to 60, sure, that's a good baseline. 45... the input lag will be insane. FPS are good, 70s, impressive stuff, right? It's running full path tracing, 70 plus FPS, but the input lag is just terrible at this point. With the controller, it wouldn't be. Again, you can play this still with the controller with these FPS. At least to me, I'm not feeling it, guys. So I'm gonna disable frame generation and try it on like performance DLSS, which is a bit too low, I think, in my opinion, for 1440p. But I know some people who don't mind utilizing performance DLSS. Let's say at this point, I would much rather play it with quality DLSS at 1440p with path tracing medium instead of this. It would get you higher FPS, it would look better, crisper at the same time, because, you know, it's not upscaling from a 720p image. Although FPS now are good and a decent baseline, I guess, in this area to utilize frame generation with. So if you want that, just enable FG, and now we're up into the 90s again, with full path tracing enabled. So basically we can get similar FPS with every setting that we've tried so far. What differs massively is the upscaling, right? Because at native 1440p, without any ray tracing or path tracing, actually ray tracing is always enabled, okay? You could get 90 FPS, right? Then with path tracing medium, you could get 90 FPS, but with quality DLSS. Then with path tracing high, you could get 90 FPS, but with quality DLSS and frame generation. And now with full ray tracing option enabled, full path tracing, you can get 90 plus FPS or 90-ish FPS average, but with performance DLSS and frame generation. It is what it is. You gotta sacrifice a lot of things to make this happen, to play with full path tracing enabled, and I don't think it's worth it on the 4070 Super. But anyway, that's it for 1440p resolution. Very big one. Holy crap, this could be an entire video just at 1440p. So I think I'll test the other resolutions for a shorter period of time, okay? Okay guys, now we're back to 1080p resolution. I restarted the game completely to apply these settings. Back to very ultra texture pool size, everything else maxed out. Full ray tracing is off. DLSS set to DLAA, no frame gen. This is native 1080p, and well, obviously it's going to be a great experience aside from the shadow popping and the quality of the shadow at the distance, right? Which once again you can't really fix no matter what, but it's getting 100 plus frames per second. If you have a 1080p display with this GPU, you can run it maxed out. If you don't care about path tracing, it's going to be a smooth experience no matter what. I would still lock it to like 110 FPS, which is about the minimum you'll see. Well, 105 right here. So maybe lock it to 100 FPS to avoid those little inconsistencies with the frame time graph. I also saw those with the 4090. And obviously, if you want even higher FPS, there's no need to use quality DLSS. At 1080p, it's a bad idea with a GPU of this caliber at least. But if you want to enable frame generation, well, you're going to get 150 plus FPS all of the time, basically. So an even smoother experience, higher refresh rate experience. It's going to be great. Let's disable frame generation again and try it with full ray tracing. Now, on medium, with just the RT Sun Shadows enabled, and it's still using DLAA, no frame generation, this is native res, you can actually get 60 plus FPS most of the time. So, if you want to fix the shadow popping, you want to keep native 1080p resolution, which I feel like is inferior to like 1440p quality DLSS, because DLSS does a really good job at higher resolutions. Yeah, you can do this. You can play at 1080p native with path tracing enabled, as you can see, on medium. As long as you keep it on medium, it's going to be fine. Why did it drop to 40? What the heck? What happened? 30s now. Something weird has happened. What is going on? All right, I think we broke the game a little bit. We need to restart it. Okay, we're back to the 70s and 60s, just like we started. 12 gigabytes of VRAM allocated. RAM is at 12.5 gigs, roughly. Oh, this is so weird. Games these days, man. Okay. No, but it's fine, as you can see. Yeah, I guess that was just a one-off, maybe? I don't know. I'm really confused, guys. Anyway, it is going to be 60 plus FPS with RT Sun Shadows only enabled. And that means that enabling frame generation on top of it will actually make it better. No. Okay. It ran out of VRAM, and that's why it's... Oh my god. Yeah, okay. We need to restart the game, play with like low textures again. Okay, we're back here, 1080p, guys, with low texture pool size, everything else maxed out. Path tracing is set to medium, DLAA, frame generation over it. And since the baseline FPS were 60 to 70, frame generation won't feel too bad in terms of input lag. It's above 100 FPS here. Feels all right. You know, if you are at 1080p resolution, maybe play like this if you're okay with lowering the texture pool size to low, which, again, it affects some textures, especially at the distance, but mostly the textures near you are kept pretty much the same, I think. But now I'm going to drop frame generation, and I'm going to select this on high. And on high, it's still a playable experience, I guess, at 1080p native resolution, although I don't think anyone is going to buy a $600 GPU or $650 GPU to play with 50 FPS at 1080p resolution, so Yeah. Alright, so that's it. Enabling frame generation over this will put us in the 80s, as you can see. Yep. 70s. So it's starting to creep into that very unpleasant area in terms of input lag, guys. Sometimes. At least in worst case scenarios, it will. I mean, you can utilize quality DLSS and frame generation turned off here at 1080p. It should get us good FPS. Yep, 70 still. But obviously, this is now playing the game at 720p resolution and upscaling it to 1080p. And I feel like 720 is just way too low, okay? It's way too low. Even with DLSS enabled, I wouldn't do this. And now let's enable full RT, guys. And we're gonna go back to DLAA over here. Full ray tracing is enabled, max path traced setting. And it's dropping into the low 40s. Oh, and dropping into the 30s as well. Look at that. It's kind of expected once again since it dropped into the 20s at 1440p. So here we're getting like 10, 12, maybe 15 more FPS most of the time. Enabling the frame generation over native resolution wouldn't be a good idea since the input lag would be very high with the 40 FPS baseline. But quality DLSS might be okay. Yeah, alright. Only dropping into the high 50s basically. So enabling FG over this will definitely make it better, right? Let's do that. Yeah, 90s. So we're back to the same values in terms of FPS, like 90 FPS-ish, a little bit higher actually, as what we saw at 1440p native without any upscaling, and as what we saw at 1440p with path tracing, performance DLSS. So what you know what I mean, right? You've watched the other settings. If you didn't, you can scroll around and you'll know better than me because I've tested so many settings today that I'm confused now, okay? And lastly, we're at 4K resolution using max settings aside from texture pool size and the full ray tracing, of course, which is disabled. This DLAA still. Frame gen is off and it's getting 50 to 60 FPS, so a decent experience, I would say, at 4K native resolution for a 4070 Super, right? Obviously, shadows and stuff like that still have a lot of pop-in because ray tracing is not enabled, but you know, it's a decent baseline to start working with the upscaling. So with DLSS quality, things are going to look very similar to native resolution at 4K, and you can get up into the 80s and 90s. That's extremely good, guys, okay? So I think as long as you stay away from the path tracing here at 4K resolution, you're going to be all right. This is a very nice experience. It's again very sad that it has so many issues with the shadow pop-in, but aside from that, it is going to be a smooth experience. It's going to look great at the same time, or look good at least in this game. And yeah, it's very enjoyable, very smooth, no stuttering. In terms of the input lag, there is none basically because we're not utilizing any frame generation. It's just a nice experience here at 4K resolution. I wonder if we can actually enable frame generation over this and make it even better, or even smoother at least. And barely. Okay, no, it ran out of VRAM, guys. It's barely improving our FPS here. Damn it. I thought we'd get like 120 with this enabled, but no. Alright, you need to have frame generation disabled at 4K resolution for it to be a buttery smooth experience, basically. And I mean, that's not a bad thing, you know? I would definitely have a ton of fun playing this game like this. I actually did play the game like this back in early access when path tracing wasn't available, and I had a ton of fun, of course. Now, let's enable ray tracing sun shadows. Of course, we need to lower down the textures as well. So let's set them to low over here, the texture pool size, and keep ray traced sun shadows. I'm not going to touch the other two settings here under path tracing at 4K resolution because it's not a good idea, really. This is just to fix or try to fix the shadow pop-in once again, and I gotta restart again for the 10th time in this video. Damn, this is taking a really long time. And here we go, 4K. Path tracing, low texture pool size, everything else maxed out. The DLSS is also set to quality, otherwise it would be a terrible experience, of course. And it's getting 50s, as you can see. So if it gets 50s and down into the 40s right here, that means that we will get 60s and 70s in the city areas. So it's not always going to be below 60 FPS. But yeah, it is below 60 FPS. That's what it takes, guys, to fix the shadow pop-in issues. Yeah, you gotta run it like this, or play with like performance DLSS. That should also work just fine. It only gave us like 10 more FPS, which is weird. Sometimes it gives us a way higher improvement in FPS, going with performance DLSS at 4K coming from quality. Yeah, right now it's 60s. Still drops into the 50s sometimes in extreme scenarios, basically, worst case scenarios. Not too bad. You know, if you have a 4K monitor, especially if it's 32 inches or lower, this is still going to look very good. I think I would be happy with this experience, and this is a good baseline as well for the frame generation right here. So if you enable that on top of this, it does give us an improvement. Good stuff. Look at that. VRAM went to 11.9 gigabytes there, but it is getting 80 FPS. It shouldn't really slow down. VRAM is actually dropping a little bit, the usage there. But again, with 80 FPS, I think the best way to go is with a controller. Because you can start noticing the input lag quite a bit with these frames. Dropping into the 70s as well, as you can see. Yeah, definitely not ideal in terms of input lag. But that's been it for this one, guys. Very, very big video. I hope I can make the next ones a bit shorter, because otherwise I'll run out of voice. Not of VRAM, okay? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, love you all. Bye-bye.